All right. Good morning. I need to go fix my hair, but mine's not as bad as his. I don't know how this guy is always here, always in the house. So we'll tune into the house for a few minutes while we wait for committee to start.
Average Canadian. To the creation of jobs. Over 2 million jobs created by this government, Madam Speaker. That's double the number that Stephen Harper did in the same amount of time. When you talk about infrastructure, no government in the last 50 years has invested more real dollars into infrastructure than this government. Go back to cuts on infrastructure. The Conservative Party has made it very clear they're going to cut the Canada Infrastructure Bank, Madam Speaker. They've made it very clear on that. Take a look, do the Google search, find out the billions of dollars of additional funding that's complemented the millions that the Government of Canada has invested in it. We are building a stronger, healthier infrastructure, something that we never saw under Stephen Harper. This is a government that understands the importance of infrastructure. Whether it's coming up with supportive programs for housing, or whether it's building streets or communities in which we all live in, Madam Speaker. All of that being supported by the type of question that I had posed earlier today on the issue of international trade. No government, contrary to the misleading information that the Conservatives talk about, no government has actually had more signed-off trade agreements than this government in the history of Canada. Canada is a trading nation, Madam Speaker. And that's something that helps and elevates all of us, and is something in which the government continues to invest in, Madam Speaker, because we see the true value.
Okay, great. We don't have to listen to him for much longer. House is on, or committee's on, sorry.
Government operations and estimates, widely known, of course.
Whoa, this committee's really quiet.
Before we start, gentle reminder, everyone, to please keep your headphones away from your mics and do not touch the mic handle so we can protect the valued hearing.
Okay, they're turning it up.
Even more
I turned it up as max as I can.
We will start right off. Welcome, Minister. I don't think I've seen you before in Ogo, so welcome to your first appearance. We'll turn the floor over to you for a 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you. Be here. Ça me fait plaisir de vous voir. Alors,
I'm pleased to see you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, and I thank you for your invitation today. We are right in the middle of an international security crisis, and we are facing modern challenges that are more and more complicated, such as climate change, artificial intelligence, and the political divisions, immigration problems, and increased inequalities. Even if our international institutions have never been perfect, these global rules that came after the Second World War are the very basis of global cooperation, and they are being tested every day. Over the past few years, this world system has been challenged by many problems. Our world has all kinds of geopolitical problems, uncertainty, especially at the economic level. During this global crisis period and deep uncertainty, Canada has to make investments to protect Canadians' interests. And what's very important is our relationship with the United States, which is an existential relationship on a geopolitical, security, and economic basis.
all of our allies and adversaries are making massive investments in their diplomatic presence around the world and in the US. Our Canadian presence abroad, and yes, including in New York City and the northeastern region of the US, is vital. Any suggestion to the contrary is extremely irresponsible and dangerous. This area shares a border with Canada. It has a very high concentration of people, of capital, of institutions, and other like-minded partners that are critical to Canada's interests, both at home and abroad. Here, we can exert influence. Canadians expect us to be at the table. The Consulate General in New York is not only Canada's oldest consulate, it is one of our most important missions in the world. We're talking about access to a market worth more than $6 trillion, $200 billion in annual two-way trade in this region alone, connecting Canadian exporters with international markets and providing essential market intelligence. The Consulate also directly supports Canadians, particularly during crisis. You may recall a tour bus crash in upstate New York or the incident at the Rainbow Bridge last November. We need a Canadian presence on the ground to liaise with U.S. authorities and relay accurate information. We cannot rely on Fox News like Pierre Poilievre does and end up calling the Rainbow Bridge incident a terrorist attack. Nous avons 182.
We have 182 missions in over 112 countries around the world, and real estate management is handled by a team of qualified public servants. They have clear instructions to make sure that all rules are followed and that Canadian taxpayers have the most for their money. That's what I expect from them. As the committee heard, global affairs civil servants have followed all the necessary rules in renting this real estate in New York. We wanted to have the best price-quality ratio for Canadians, and I expected that. We have also heard over several meetings you had on this subject. It was an operational decision. It wasn't a political decision.
Sure. I just want to say that I find it ironic that on the day of this historic and pivotal election in the United States, the opposition continues to argue that we should be reducing our presence in the United States. To be clear, I disagree. American voters will make a choice today, and our government will respect that choice and work closely with the new administration. I, for one, firmly believe that one of the most important ways to show respect for your neighbor, to engage with them, and build a relationship is face-to-face. I will now take your questions.
Thank you, Minister. We'll start with Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes, please.
Right, let's get to it, baby. Right to Barrett.
New documents reported in Politico today reveal that Tom Clark lied during his appearance before this committee. We know that he personally complained that his taxpayer-funded residence wasn't up to his standards because it didn't have a luxury kitchen or the perfect floor plan. And after Tom Clark complained, Justin Trudeau rewarded his friend and media pal with a new luxury condo at 4 times the cost to taxpayers. So to Canadians who are watching, Justin Trudeau and Tom Clark fleeced the taxpayers, and they tried to cover it up. So, Minister, do you think it's appropriate for Justin Trudeau to have awarded his media pal, Tom Clark, with such a flagrant waste of tax dollars, especially during this cost of living crisis that we're facing?
So, before you interrupt me, because I know, Michael, that's a strategy you use, I really think that there are 3 things. First, I think that, Canadians are getting good value for money because there will be $7 million in Canadian taxpayers' savings. Second, the process was respected at all times. And thirdly, I profoundly believe that more than ever, as we're going through, the American people are going through an important election today, we need to invest in our presence in the U.S. So I really hope, Michael, that you agree with me, because I know your riding is next to the U.S. and you have 2 bridges that permit fantastic workers going through it, truck drivers exporting and importing millions of dollars every day between Canada and U.S. So I've answered your question.
Is it common for your department to spend nearly $10 million on luxury condos without you personally approving?
So first and foremost, to answer your question, this was not a political decision because it was an operational decision. And you had numerous people, officials of mine, that came to see you and said that. So these are the facts, and I really
When
hope
did
that
you
you can.
approve the $9
Mr.
million
Speaker, this is again
luxury
the strategy
condo
that
for
Michael uses, which
Consul
is to
General
interrupt
Tom
me.
Clark?
Michael, can you just stop? I'll
It's
just
his
finish.
time.
I promise it won't be
Point
long.
of
I
order,
just
Chair.
want to finish
Point
my
of
sentence.
order, Chair.
Yep. Mr. Barrett?
Okay, so in spite of the minister's hostile response to my first question, she was afforded equal time to the amount of time that I posed the question, even though she didn't answer it. I asked a second question, and she was afforded equal amount of time to the length of the question, and she was able to do with that what she wished. Now, if the minister wants to interrupt me, that of course is not in order at this committee. So, Chair, could you please provide clarification to the minister that she will be afforded the same amount of time to respond as the amount of time that I posed the question?
It has been the practice of this committee that it is the member's time. So if you wish to take 5 minutes for a question and provide 30 seconds for a response, that is your decision, Mr. Barrett, but it is the committee member's time. Go ahead, sir.
First learn about the $9 million New York City condo on Billionaires Row for Justin Trudeau's media buddy, Tom Clark. What was the date?
So first and foremost, I must say that this was not a political decision, so I learned it through the media. And at the same time, I made sure that all rules was respected, and that's the case in this case.
We didn't get a date from the minister. The story broke on July the 12th, and I have an email from your former chief of staff dated on June 17th that says, thanks for the briefing note of the issue. The decision to sell and purchase a new residence seems like the logical step to take in this instance. Did you meet with your chief of staff between June 17th and July 12th?
So I must say that, of course, the department informed my chief of staff once the decision was taken because, of course, it was not a political decision.
Chief.
So many times per day, Michael. And you know what?
So
it's good news because there's so many things happening.
This is flagrant malpractice.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking.
Yeah, and your time is up.
I'm
This is flagrant malpractice for you as a minister to just completely ignore.
Kelly, I'm sorry.
I'm going to interrupt.
I understand you're in the same party, both. But at the same time,
I'm going to interrupt everyone here. I have the floor. A couple things. It is the tradition in this committee. We use our last names out of kind of a sign of respect, but it is the member's time. I would ask, you'll have, I'm sure, an opportunity to perhaps get some of your points across to other questions, but it is the member's time. We ask that you allow Mr. Barrett to speak and provide answers. How much time do you have? We're at 3:44, so you have 2 minutes and 15 seconds, Mr. Barrett.
So, Minister, in the June 17th memo to your chief of staff, it says Tom Clark approved the $9 million condo and it was instrumental in the purchase. With hindsight, do you wish that your chief of staff had got your personal sign-off on this if you claim that you did not, in fact, know about it?
So, Michael, no. Why? Because you've already answered. You have already asked me the question, and I've already answered. So this was a decision that, according to Treasury Board rules, had to go through the department, and therefore no
These are Treasury Board rules that your government changed. Of course, you raised the limit just in time to, of course, buy this luxury condo for Justin Trudeau's buddy Tom Clark.
I'm sorry, but that's false.
Now,
that was done in 2019.
Now, right, your cabinet made the change, Minister. So you're the one who made the change just in time to be able to make this purchase so that you could say you didn't hear anything and you didn't say anything.
That's
How
false
many
also.
heads of mission have been, quote, instrumental in purchasing luxury condos?
So this is a decision that is always taken by the department. And so I know that you've been doing character assassination against Tom Clark, and that's really sad because when you don't have your facts straight, usually what you do, you resort to personal attacks.
What's really sad, Minister, is that Canadians are struggling just to get by, lined up at food banks in record numbers, and you seem to have checked out on any accountability that you should be exercising in your role as minister. And we see that instead of helping Canadians, you're helping well-connected liberal insiders. So I think I have just about a minute left. And I have to know, because the claim from your officials was that this was going to be a great deal. Canadians were going to save all kinds of money and that they had sold the previous condo. We heard that this was the case. So if you could tell Canadians now, how much was the check that the Receiver General received for the sale of the former residence that justified the purchase of this $9 million condo. How much did you sell the previous residence for?
So we are convinced that we'll make sure that we have $7 million back for Canadian taxpayers, because I think it is a good value for money transaction. It is a transaction that is actually
Minister,
well supported.
is that the check
and
has,
I'm sorry,
I'm
still speaking.
You haven't received a check.
So, and you've spoken for a long time. It's not a question.
You haven't
it's
received
actually
a check.
rant.
I'm afraid we are out of time. Both
Canadians are out of pocket millions.
Mr. Kuzmierczak?
Oh, this is going to be
Thank you,
good
Mr.
with
Chair,
Brock.
and
I want
thank you
Brock.
so much, Minister, for being here today. Welcome to the mighty OGO Committee. This transaction saves Canadian taxpayers $7.4 million. I want to repeat that. This transaction saves Canadians taxpayers $7.4 million. The process that led us here is independent and it is rigorous. There were 21 properties appraised. A 100-page analysis was written on this transaction. But I want to focus on the third point. This is an investment in the most important relationship for Canada, and that is the relationship with the United States. And in my community of Windsor, Tecumseh, and Windsor, Essex, there's no more important relationship for cross-border communities like mine. We have the EV battery plant that's creating 2,500 permanent jobs for local workers. We have the largest greenhouse sector in all of North America, agriculture, and our number one export destination is the United States. So you better believe it. We pay very close attention to the U.S.-Canada relationship, and we are absolutely for strengthening that relationship. Minister, in your role as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, can you talk to us about the importance of investing in that relationship between Canada and the United States?
Thank you, Eric. I think it's a very, very relevant question. I know that Canadians are all watching what's going on south of the border today. And I must say, it is not only the most important relationship we have with a country in the world, it's existential to us. And I've mentioned it in my speech, geopolitically, economically, at the security level, every single way. And that relationship with the U.S. is my number one priority. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, I'm steward of that relationship, of course, with the Prime Minister. And we decided to make a key investment because we know that all countries of the world are in the U.S. and particularly in New York. And so we wanted to make sure that we were going through the right investments. And I expect, of course, at all times that my public servants follow the rules while knowing that our priority is to make sure that we invest in the relationship. And, you know, I think that when you believe in a relationship, you actually invest in it. And so that's why it is really important that we are well represented in the U.S. at the consulate level. I've mentioned it also in my speech. This is the the oldest consulate we have in the world because that's the first one we opened in New York City at the time, more than 100 years ago. And also, it is one of the most important ones. So we know that there's so many jobs that are linked to it, definitely in Windsor, Tecumseh, which I had the chance to visit and to see you, Eric. This is the case in Michael Barrett's also writing, in all of our writings, because at the end of the day, we know that it's a market of $6 trillion. And if we're not there, well, others will be, and we'll lose either opportunities or the possibility of defending our jobs back home.
And thank you, Minister, for that. And there's a stark difference here. You know, the Conservatives want to do foreign policy and foreign affairs on the cheap. And my Conservative colleague in one of the previous meetings suggested that we should look at locating the consulate, not in New York, but in New Jersey. Can you respond to that?
Well, there are only two countries in New York that are not in Manhattan. And so it is either Afghanistan or Bangladesh.
What?
And we think that we
Oh, I
should
see.
have an official residence in Manhattan. Just to give you an idea, the UK purchased an official residence in 2019, which cost $20 million. New Zealand 2015, so
They have a
that's
bigger
some time
economy
ago,
than us.
worth $11 million. So that's worth more now. Even if you look at G7 countries, France, for example, purchased a $19 million official residence in 2015. Italy recently purchased a $35 million official residence in Manhattan.
Again, both
The
bigger
EU,
economies.
16 million. And finally, Japan, 44.3 million for their official
Again,
residence.
a bigger economy than
We
Canada.
need to be there because our like-minded partners, the Five Eyes and also the G7 are there. But I'm not even giving you the numbers for other countries, including, of course, China and countries that are trying to push for their interests in the U.S.
Minister, this government, this Liberal government, has attracted $50 billion of automotive investment in
because
just
of
the last 3 years alone. We've beat out so many countries for that investment. How important is it that we strengthen that relationship in New York so that we're able to compete against Japan, against Italy, against the UK,
Those are private
against the
deals
European
between
Union,
private companies.
all of which, as you mentioned, they paid
got
$44
nothing to do
million
with the
for
Consulate
their
General.
consulate, 19 million, 16 million. Canada paid 9 million. That's pragmatic.
It's
And
very
we're punching above our weight.
I'm afraid we're way past our time for
Oh,
response.
sorry, Kelly, we were following you.
Oh, it's okay. You're welcome to respond, but it's going to keep you here later than I think you had planned. So we'll go to Mrs. Bagnola.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Joly, Madame Condell, Mr. Dubois, thanks for being here with us today. I strongly doubt that things are slow at work in global affairs. There is a list of 2,300 properties. That's what we were told last August 21st, and I wondered if there are some properties that have not been included in this inventory, and if so, how many and why? I will ask my officials to intervene here. I will refer this question to our Deputy Minister for this issue.
All of the assets that we have must be declared and registered in the
Merci.
directory. Merci.
Je pense.
Merci.
Combien?
Thank you. How much did the space shared between the consulate and the United Nations, the property bought on Lexington Avenue in 2018? I'll ask Alan. Mr. Chair, I will have to come back to you with this answer because I don't have the figures before me right now, but this information does exist and it's easy to find. Well, this question was asked on August 21st, and I believe we had exactly the same answer. Currently, with the new residents, there is no taxes paid under the Vienna Convention. That's what I understand. The Vienna Convention was implemented when exactly? And secondly, why did it not apply to the former residents? Why is it a novelty right now? Thank you, Julie. This question is quite technical, so once again, I'll go to my officials. The question, as far as the tax exemption, it's because the fees paid in a condo are not really included. They're not covered by the Vienna Convention, so they could not be tax exempt. So when you're in this condo concept, we can make some tax exemptions. So it's more advantageous for the government to have this sort of cooperative, no, rather a condo rather than a cooperative arrangement. So I understand that under the Vienna Convention, cooperatives are not tax exempt. Thank you. A question that was asked last August 21st, when you, well, maybe it's better that I ask the minister directly, why did you not inform the population of the transaction once it was effected, and is it normal not to inform the population of new transactions carried out by global affairs? Yes, that's these are part of the daily operations of the department. We have 182 missions across the world in 112 countries with thousands of employees at global affairs. So there are some real estate transactions that are carried out by the department every day, every week. And so the population is not informed. The people are not informed. That's what I understand, because the people are in the dark on these daily operations. Yes, that's why I said real estate management should be carried out properly. There are rules in place, and these rules are enforced by the Treasury Board. My expectations within the ministry is that these rules be followed. Their work has to be clearly defined. The Quebecers and Canadian taxpayers should have value for their money. A taxpayer who would like to see the transactions that are carried out by Global Affairs Canada is there somewhere they could go obtain this information without seeking special access? Is there transparency? Yes, the rules that apply are clearly defined. Laws linked to transparency. There are certain processes linked to the ATIP. So you have to make an access to information application. There is no website which would promote transparency in terms of the transactions carried out by Global Affairs. Yes, that's my understanding. Maybe there are other pieces of information that Sandra or Robin could add. Mr. Chair, as all the assets that are bought or sold by the government, they have to be included in the real estate inventory. That information should be available there. Thank you. Madam Tattersall, Comptroller General, on August 21st, 2024, said that we must make sure that we have a fair and open transaction. So concretely, what does that really mean? When you say have a fair and open transaction, it's fair to whom and about what? What is this really about?
Il faut bien entendu que les contribuables canadiens.
The Canadian taxpayers, we have to make sure that they have value for their money, and we must understand that everything is done in full transparency for the benefit of Canadians.
Mrs. Vignola. Ms. Blaney, please, for 6.
Oh, not Miss Blaney.
Well, thank you very much to the chair, and I thank the witnesses for being here with us today. I think this is a hard conversation when you have so many Canadians across the country really struggling to afford basic necessities, and you know how hard it is when you're thinking about, can I keep my house or am I going to have to sell and actually have to pay more in rent than I do in my mortgage? It's hard to hear about big spending. So I just want to recognize that. But I also have a hard time listening to the Conservatives when I know back in October of 2010, their investment in properties and diplomatic residence rose by 430%. So it's a bit frustrating on both sides for me to listen to this when I know how hard it is for Canadians right now. And I do see the value in diplomacy, and I do see the value, of course, being in these opportunities, although I would love to see us do a little bit more work connecting rural and remote communities to some of these opportunities. And I hope that you will continue to expand your knowledge and understanding of how to do that. But I do have a few questions through the chair for you, Minister. And I think, I heard your response multiple times saying it wasn't a political decision. And I understand that as a person who understands the basic roles of operations versus the political influence in this place. But there is a lot of concern that there was political interference. So I'm just wondering if you could please explain to the committee, is there a price threshold that property purchases within Global Affairs Canada limits? Is there limits? And how is the minister, and in your role through the chair, how are you included? Is there a place where you're talked to about it? Because again, you said that you learned about it when you opened the news, and that seems a little concerning to me. So I'm just wondering, how does that work? I understand that you've delegated the role to staff. I understand that it's operational, but how are you included to make sure that there's some wisdom in the political realm?
So there is wisdom. Why? Because we made sure that all transactions below $10 million would be done by the department, understanding that the markets, the real estate markets around the world are different sometimes from Canada. And there are many jurisdictions around the world where real estate is really, really expensive, including, of course, Manhattan. Nobody's surprised by it here. And so based on that, the decision was taken by the department to invest, but also make sure that there would be good value for money, that accessibility rules would be respected, etc. Now, I can offer my officials, Sandra and Robin, to answer your questions regarding the different criterias, because I think it's really important, and that's my expectations, that they follow the criterias. But also we do so, Rachel, and that's really important, based on what our like-minded partners do. What does the UK does? What does Australia? What does New Zealand? What does France, Italy, Germany, the EU? How do they deal with their real estate? Because, of course, we're not alone in this diplomatic game. We are, trying to defend our interests, sometimes in competition with others.
And I appreciate that. And sorry, Minister, I'm not trying
go ahead.
To interrupt, and I certainly don't want to talk over each other. I know that's very hard for our interpreters. But, I hear what you're saying, and I respect that. But, there's a lot of concern as well about the role of the Consular General. And so I'm just wondering, in your view, should the Consul General be consulted about or involved in the purchase of an official residence? And if you could tell me why or why not.
So there is an entire branch within our department, within my department, that is in charge of dealing with all the real estate we have. It is an expertise that we have. It is an important one because we're dealing with 182 different jurisdictions, with thousands of people across the diplomatic network. And some of them, of course, as diplomats do, live abroad and live in these different residences or work every day in our consulates or embassies and high commission. So usually what is being done, of course, is that branch of the department is in charge of the real estate. They take the decisions. You've seen through this entire process, you've heard so many, more than 20 different options were looked at. There was
and I appreciate that, but if we could just come back to that.
Yeah, because, I'm getting that.
Because what I want to know is it specific for each Consular General that they're included, or is it a more general approach where you sort of get an understanding of what is needed on a broad scope,
of course,
and then apply it? Because there's a lot of insinuation here that there was specific connection, and I think that's concerning for Canadians.
Yes, and Rachel, I was getting to that, and so basically.
Seconds.
Of course, usually high commissioners or ambassadors or consuls are informed, but they're not decision makers, never.
Thanks very much. We'll go to Mr. Brock, please, for 5.
Minister, notwithstanding your opening comments about the importance of Canada's relationship to the United States, your appearance today is exclusively about the egregious abuse of taxpayer money. Emily Richardson, the Chief of Staff of your Associate Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, the author of the infamous memo, was given information that Tom Clark was instrumental throughout the process and gave the green light for the purchase of the Billionaires Row condo. She testified that she simply inserts information as provided to her. Minister, you acknowledge that she wrote the original memo circulated on June 17th to your former chief that states Clark was instrumental, correct?
Donc, je vais juste répondre à votre question, Larry.
Just to answer your question, Larry. my chief of staff was informed once that his decision was made, and that's what was stated here. That's the information I have. These are the facts.
Day after this committee passed a motion ordering all documents from your department related to the purchase of the condo, the same Emily Richardson, who says she simply inputs information provided to her, all of a sudden issued a major correction saying it was a mistake, that Clark was instrumental and gave the green light. Minister, do you find that suspicious in any way?
Non, absolument pas. Parce que
Okay.
bien entendu,
No, absolutely not. Because as I answered our colleague Rachel Blaney earlier, there's always some information provided to different ambassadors and consuls, but they don't have any decision-making power.
Suspicious, as do the millions of Canadians who are watching this on a live feed. And now it's been confirmed that your staff, the ministry officials who've appeared here, and even Tom Clark himself, the buddy, the good friend of Justin Trudeau himself, was instrumental in starting the process of relocating Tom Clark to Billionaires Row condominium in Manhattan. It was simply unsuitable for him. It was important for him to have the full suite of Gaggenau appliances. It was important for him to have the $5,000 coffee machine. It was important for him to have the golf simulator, and your office provided that to him. Isn't that correct?
non, c'est faux, Larry.
No, that's not true, Larry. You know what Canadians are looking at today? There are millions of people looking at us. I think that's somewhat exaggerated. I think there are millions of Canadians that have their eyes focused on what's happening in the U.S., the results of today's elections, and what Canadians expect.
What the hell does the U.S. election have to do with a coffee maker?
In our relationship with the United States.
A memo created by Emily Richardson was sent to your office, to your chief of staff. Your office gets involved, and the story around Tom Clark mysteriously and suddenly changes. Did you personally, Minister, become involved in the process to cover up for Justin Trudeau's close friend, Tom Clark? Yes or no?
Absolument pas. Puis je mets...
Absolutely not. I would like to know, every time you mention Mr. Trudeau, do you have...
Trudeau, did your chief of staff assist Justin Trudeau in covering up for Tom Clark? Yes or no?
J'ai déjà répondu.
I think I've already answered that question. Every time you mention Justin Trudeau, I will also mention Pierre Poilievre, because one thing is for sure.
Again, were you ever briefed on the condo purchase from June 17th when your top official, your chief of staff, became aware a government document identified Clark as being instrumental and gave the green light?
Est-ce que Pierre Poilievre vous a demandé?
What Pierre Poilievre, he asked us the same question 3 times. Maybe I'll give 3 different answers.
What else is your chief of staff keeping from you, and by extension, you, Minister, keeping from Canadians?
Je pense que les Canadiens...
I think Canadians expect us to invest in the relationship, that we have value for our money, and that all the processes are followed.
en accord avec cette approche.
So we agree with that.
Clark is paying $1,800 per month in rent. That's less than the national average for Canadians. Do you think that's fair, that that's what he has to pay in rent for a $9 million luxury condo when your government is responsible for doubling rent, doubling mortgage costs, requiring Canadians to have to save 25 years just for a down payment? That's your government's legacy, and you're giving this guy a $9 million condo for $1,800 a month. Do you think it's fair, yes or no?
How much is Pierre Poilievre paying for staying in his government-funded
Minister,
house
I have great
right
news
now?
for you. You're going to have lots of
but
time to
Michael,
ask us questions when you're on the opposition side of the House. But today, you're supposed to be a minister that's responsible for your department, and you're demonstrating a failure in that.
Yeah, that is our time. We will go to Ms. Atwin.
Good job.
Perhaps she can continue the line of questioning. Go ahead, Ms. Atwin, please, for 5. Both sides, Mr. Kuzmierczuk, Mr. Barrett.
You got your clip?
It's Miss, I'm sorry, colleagues.
Point of order.
I'm sorry, it's Miss Atwin's time, both of you. Miss Blaney?
I just wanted to remind people that the interpreters do have a hard time hearing when people are speaking like that. So it's not only to listen to the chair, as we all should. It's to also respect the people who work for us.
Is Miss Atwin's floor. Thank you, Miss Blaney. Go ahead for 5, Miss Atwin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Minister, for being with us and for your officials to join us again today. And I would just open by, sending a message to my friends and family in the United States. It is a particularly important day. We've all been kind of anxiously awaiting today, even though I know we may not have results as early as we'd like, but just wishing everyone well. And I hope that everyone got out and vote and exercise that critical right that we have to participate in
enough of
democracy.
the U.S. politics.
I also like to just add to the
talking about
context
Condo
of
Clark here today,
what we're
hon.
dealing with globally, and the challenges and difficulties right now, and all of the different issues that have come your way as minister. And so I very much appreciate that you're spending this time with us today, speaking about the purchase of a property. So, Minister, my Conservative colleagues have suggested that your office played a role in this transaction. As we've heard from Global Affairs Canada officials on multiple occasions at this committee, this transaction followed all guidelines and, in fact, was cost-saving for Canadians. Can you reconfirm that fact?
Thank you, Jenica. I'm reconfirming again.
Thank you very much. And, you mentioned a little bit about the context of other nations and other countries and their consuls, in the importance of it being located in Manhattan, for example. But more generally, how does our diplomatic work in the United States contribute to our competitiveness on the world stage?
I think if there's a country in the world that knows the U.S., it's Canada. And so not only are we really proud of our diplomatic network, our consulates, we have one of the most important and biggest embassies in Washington. But I must say, throughout the entire year, I've been in contact with many foreign ministers around the world, many leaders, and they all come to see us to understand what's going on in the U.S. And so that's important because it gives us also a form of leverage, influence around the world. But I must say also that it is important to Canadians because so many jobs are linked to it in every single of our ridings, including, of course, in New Brunswick, in Fredericton, including in Dean's riding in Niagara. So we're interestingly linked. So we need to make sure that we are there to protect Canadian jobs and defend our interests, and that's what we're doing, and that's what we're doing definitely also in New York, in Manhattan.
Thank you very much. And, what are the dangers then of cutting those investments and pulling back from those diplomatic engagements with our most important friend, ally, and bilateral trading partner?
So the Conservatives for a long time had the vision of not investing in diplomacy, actually getting Canada out of the UN, which would be, to be frank, catastrophic, because we need to make sure that we defend our interests through the multilateral system because we're not a nuclear power, and therefore the best way for us to defend our interests is through having and defending strong rules and a rules-based order. And at the same time, and Rachel was referring to that earlier, an article of October 2010. At the time, the Harper government thought that by cutting many of its investment in real estate, they actually would be saving money. But what we're seeing that what happened at the time is that the cost soared by 430% at the time. And so we decided to do things differently to make sure that we would invest, yes, a big amount of money, but at the same time sell to make sure ultimately that we would be able to have good money for good value for money that was being invested. And so I think this is a pragmatic approach. This is a responsible approach, and we're acting as adults in the room.
Thank you very much. And do you have an update on the sale of the former residence that was at Park Avenue? Do we know where that is at?
So, Robin, can you provide that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The property has now been on the market for about 81 days as of yesterday, and we know that there was a lot of movements on the file. The real estate agent has reported that he's received 38 different inquiries, and he's got like 8 showings from potential buyers, and he's got as well many questions from other real estate agents that have gone there to visit it. So the property is not sold yet, but it's still on the market. There's movement. The real estate agent is quite happy with the way the file is unfolding. He asked me not to share too much details because I don't want to interfere with this transaction. And he said that we are still within our time frame for marketing for this type of asset, which is between 3 to 6 months. Thank you.
And just with my remaining time, I hope we get top dollar for that sale and so the best money return on investment for Canadians. Thank you very much.
Perfectly on 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There have been 44 applications to authorize transactions that were surplus, representing about $44 million. How many requests for authorization since 2022 have been made since the limit was 10 million? Did you mean for each month? That's you mean? I'm just trying to understand. You think beyond the 10 million a month? Have there been any applications made at the Treasury Board to go beyond 10 million since 2022? We can check that, but as far as I know, no. We asked for an increase in our level to reflect the inflation, the high rate of inflation on the market. Thank you. The transactional limit was increased by 150%. It was 4 million, and now it's 10 million. In 2022, the decision to increase that limit, is it linked to an increase of a sharp increase in real estate prices between 2019 and 2022? There have been a rise in real estate, not just in New York, but across the world. I don't know if it's 50%. Yes, there was great demand, and to make sure that we were able to quickly react, and also in terms of what other nations were doing, we decided to increase the limit. Often individuals, when they're buying a new home, those especially people who don't have huge resources, we sell the existing house before buying a new house. Is there a possibility in the Sales Act to determine a date or an extended date that coincides with the new residence? Why didn't we follow this procedure for the Park Avenue residents? Maybe Sandra or Robin can look at that. Yes, there's always a risk, balancing risk, selling or buying. First, we did an analysis of the situation. It's a responsibility of the consulate and financial analysis. In terms of business continuity, we realized that it was quite important to have all the levers available in our relationship with the United States. 1 month before the election, we wanted to have a residence that would allow us to promote our goals as quickly as possible. We also took into account the temporary rental fees for the Consul General to handle personal matters. We did a financial analysis and found out that it was advantageous to buy or to wait a few months before selling.
Ms. Blaney, please.
Thank you, Chair, and of course to the Minister through the Chair. One of the things that I actually found very concerning, especially as a New Democrat who cares a lot about unions and about workers, is I understand that the building that we've bought into was built entirely with non-union labor, and that the contractor was actually charged with stealing wages from workers. According to the Manhattan District Attorney, the company Parkside Construction and its affiliates stole more than $1.7 million in wages over 3 years from about 520 workers. And the company also hid about $42 million in wages from the state insurance officials to avoid paying millions in workers' compensation premiums, which is pretty concerning. So I'm just wondering, in the work that we do as a country in purchasing, I understand there's many different departments that are included in that process. Is there ever a discussion about checking what happened to the people who built that investment that we're putting money into and what the impact will be? I think it's really important as the country of Canada to do some of that research, and I'm wondering if there was any discussions about that or if that's something that at a cabinet level that will be looked at in the future.
Well, when it comes to supporting good union jobs in Canada, definitely that's what we're doing, and we're attracting investments from around the world. Canada is now the third jurisdiction in the world being able to attract the most investments. We've seen it particularly in the auto sector, EV sector. These are all good union jobs. And these are actually investments that are being discussed at our embassies and official residences around the world. I hear you. I'm very supportive of labor workers as well, Rachel, as our government is. In this case, of course, we wanted to make sure that we had good value for money. And I think we were able to get in the circumstances in a market that is extremely expensive, that I think none of us around the table is able to pay for, to be frank. We were able to get a good deal, bearing in mind that we had a good asset also to sell that would make sure that we would be able to bring back.
So no discussion about workers in terms of what we purchase in terms of investment.
We're in
A brief answer, Minister, please.
Yeah, we're in 182 countries around the world. Union workers are not organized the same way, but I take your point, and I think it's a fair point, and I'll follow up on that.
Thanks very much. We'll go to Mrs. Kusi and then Mr. Souza to finish off.
Kusi's pretty good.
Bonjour, Madame Ministre Melanie. You said in your opening statement today that it was in the media that you learned about the $9 million condo purchase. How is it that you didn't know about this purchase before you yourself admitting to just learning about it from the media?
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm happy to see you. I know that you come from the Diplomatic Network of Canada, being the former consul in Dallas, and I know you trust foreign affairs to deal with important assets in which you had the chance to work in Argentina, in Dallas. And you know that the rules are always, under my watch at least, respected, and that was the case. And so we followed Treasury Board rules as you did when you were former consul in Dallas.
That wasn't the question.
Thank you for that response, Minister, but I still find it very shocking, as I think Canadians do, that you were made aware of this purchase through the media. Minister, how did you not know that the Deputy Chief of Protocol in Global Affairs attended a Russian embassy party? How did you not know that?
So that's a fair point, and I was not happy about my team not informing me. And I think I've said what I needed to say about that. Since then, my question to you is, why would the Conservative not support Ukraine? And this is a
you don't get to ask questions.
Moment in the world while Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom, but also ours. And I know as a diplomat, you would know what that means.
Well, I appreciate you bringing up Ukraine, because my next question to you, Melanie, was how did you not know that Canada accepted an invitation to send a patrol ship to Cuba while the Russian Navy was present? So I think your point about Ukraine is a very good lead-in to this question. How did you not know that?
So this is a question you should ask to the Defense Department and my dear colleague who's doing a great job, Bill Blair. And he's the minister that will see the doubling and nearly tripling of the defense budget under his watch and under our watch as government, which the Conservative cut the Defense Department's budget 5 years in a row, and that's unfortunate.
My point, Madam Minister Melanie, is that you have just indicated now 3 things that you did not know. You did not know that we had purchased a $9 million condo at a time when Canadians are suffering as a result of your government. You did not know that the Deputy Chief of Protocol for Global Affairs Canada attended a Russian embassy party. And you did not know that Canada accepted an invitation to send a patrol ship to Cuba while the Russian Navy was present, despite your comments about Ukraine. I'm very concerned about you, Minister Melanie, not knowing what is going on. And why are you so uninformed as to what goes on in your own department? Why do you not know?
So these were not the answers I gave you. So of course, Stephanie, you can't,
you did
say and use the pre-written questions you had.
Minister
but
said that you do not know.
What I can tell you, what I know, is the investments in the U.S. is fundamental, which you would agree because you used to work as a diplomat in the U.S. as a a trade commissioner, which I really thank you for your service to the country, because I
Thank
think
you,
it was
Minister.
important.
But I maintain the position that you did not know those three things. How did you find out about the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Did you know that?
I think that not only
How did you find out
we were
about
ready.
October 7th? How were you made aware of that? Did you know that? It's apparent.
I think, you know.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Blaney.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sure the member just doesn't notice, but she is yelling. And again, I just want to bring up concern for the interpreters.
We've had this issue brought up before. If there are worries about the interpreter, they will contact the clerk to address it, so we don't need to do point of orders on those. Go ahead, Ms. Kusi. The time is yours for 1 minute, 10 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fortunately, it is apparent that you do know there is an election in the United States today, as you indicated that in your opening statement. But you spoke in your opening statement about how security is at a pivotal moment in the history of Canada, in the history of the world, and yet there is so much that you don't know. I'm here to tell you today, Canadians expect you to know. And if you hope to one day be the leader of the official opposition, Canadians will expect you to know, Madam Minister Melanie.
A point of order.
Mr. Chair, with my remaining time,
I would like to answer.
I'd like
Okay,
to.
sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Point of order.
All right, go ahead,
Yeah,
Mr.
point of order,
Kuzmierczak.
Mr. Chair. On that principle of needing to know, I would encourage the leader of the opposition to get his
that's
security
not a point
clearance.
of order, Mr. Kuzmierczak.
That's important.
That's not a point of order.
Please, let's stick to real points of order. Go ahead, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. And
Mrs.
with my remaining time, Mr. Chair, I would like to move a motion given the evidence that we have received here today. And I have submitted it to the clerk in both official languages. I will now read it into the record.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
She's prepared.
Given that newly released access to information documents reveal that 2 months after the appointment of Canada's Consul General to New York, Tom Clark notified Global Affairs that the previous official residence was not suitable and expressed concerns over completing renovations. Given that this information contradicts his previous testimony before this committee on September 12, 2024, when he stated, "I had no role whatsoever in either deciding to sell the former residence or buying the new one," the committee called Tom Clark to testify for 2 hours within 21 days of this motion being adopted. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I agree.
Thank you. I'll start a speaking order, but we only had Mr. Sousa left. I'm wondering if you're fine, we'll release the witnesses.
I'd rather ask a question.
Okay, well, we'll have to, sorry, we'll have to get to the motion first then, Mr. Sousa. I tried, Minister. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Shawari.
Can we suspend the intervention on the motion? Let Mr. Sousa ask the question, release the minister, and continue with the motion on hand. Thank you.
That's not how it works. He has
Are
to
we
ask
fine
for
with that,
unanimous
colleagues?
consent.
Yep, look at that. Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Sousa.
Thank
Okay,
you, Chair.
there we
And
go. He
Minister,
actually
thank
got
you for
UC.
being here. It's interesting and hypocritical that I find that we're accusing individuals who are temporary in their positions. Consul General is not going to be there forever. So here we have individuals opposite who are benefiting from subsidized rents. They're not paying rent. Pierre Poilievre lives in an historic mansion, Stoneway, and pays rent free. So
Stornoway has always been for the leader of the opposition. It's not a nice mansion. You can drive by it. It's the oldest building on the street.
previous life provincially, the provinces benefit greatly from the representation in New York City. I attended the former residence on many occasions with the Consul General and other officials, multiple times selling Ontario and selling Canada. And the negotiations and the discussions had were with U.S. officials, U.S. businesses, U.S. institutions benefiting and greatly looking for Canada to do business. That's not possible without representation in New York City to do so. And interestingly enough, when we talk about creating investments, the jobs, the economic benefits that come from those discussions, other officials from other countries are paying attention and recognizing it too. They're not going to go to New Jersey. They're not going to go anywhere else to have those discussions. They have it in mind hand because there's multiple discussions being had concurrently in the city. And interestingly enough, the Conservative Consul General at the time, because I had had the opportunity of being with both parties throughout that process, they complained They complain about the status of the residents. They complain about the maintenance, the engagement, the requirement for upkeep to maintain the same level of engagement with the other competitors from other countries. And so I have two questions. One is the timing. Has there been ongoing discussions about the maintenance, the upgrading, the modernization of the residents over time? Is this something that just happened suddenly, or is this something that's been ongoing for a while?
Thank you. Thank you, Charles, on this. I think it's a very important point. And just to raise the issue of personalizing whether it's actually Justin Trudeau's diplomatic network or, public servant, I think it's a very slippery road. Why? Because I think that throughout 150 years and more as a country, we've built very strong institutions, including our diplomatic network around the world, which is non-partisan and should not become partisan. And when the Conservatives do that, the question that I have in mind is, what's next? Our judicial system? Our police forces? That's a real question. And we're seeing, what can happen when that's the case. Now, you've mentioned the fact that it was important when you were the Minister of Finance in Ontario, how much you valued being able to have conversations and meetings in New York to attract investments to your province. We know that Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, was at the official residence. I also met Scott by fluke, actually, in India. He uses a lot of our embassies, high commissions, official residence, and he should. And, I think we agree on that. Vic Fideli also was in hosting meetings in New York. Erin O'Toole also, when he was leader of the opposition. Dennis King as well. So I just think that while I can understand why the opposition is trying to make this an issue, I think at the end of the day, what is common sense, what is very pragmatic, what is very responsible is what we're doing. And I think that Canadians see throughout all of this haze, and they trust that we're taking a good decision. And in terms of timing and maintenance, I'll just ask Robin, who has more information than I do on this very issue.
In about 20 seconds.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The issues with the residents, they were raised a long time ago. It started in 2014, so for 10 years we were tracking. In 2017, we did a building condition report that indicated several issues, and in 2021 we had approved a renovation project. So there had been long-standing issues with that residence that we knew about.
Thank you. So it's evident that there's a net benefit to Canadians, both with the existence of having representation in New York City and the transaction that's being taken place. There's asset
Mr.
value
Sousa,
regardless.
We're past time. If you want to ask a yes or no question.
Are you cutting me off?
We're past our time. If you want to finish with a yes or no question.
Thank you for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Minister, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms.
Thank you,
McCardle,
Kelly.
Mr. Dubois,
Thank you all.
thanks
it
for
was
joining
a pleasure
us.
to be with you. And looking forward to working as Team Canada, developing strong relationships throughout the U.S. Thank you.
We'll dismiss our witnesses. We'll start a speaking list on the motion. I have Mr. Shorey.
Mr. Chair, can I ask for a 5-minute suspension to have a conversation with our team? Because this motion came in the last minute, so we just...
Sure. 5 minutes stops,
Okay,
please.
thank you.
Charles, so you were past your time. I was trying to get to where.
Okay, so the meeting is 2 hours long scheduled, and they only had Joly and the other witnesses for the first hour because Joly can actually just say that she doesn't want to show up. She can just deny that you can't summon a minister just the same as you could summon like a private citizen or a government official. Ministers can decline to come to a committee, and that's just it. So I guess she said, fine, I'll come, but I'm only coming for an hour. So she came, she showed up, she didn't answer any questions. She just was just completely deflective. So now they're going to go back to debating on the motion. And while we're waiting for that, we'll just tune into the House and we can see what's going on here. It's probably debating on
Majority
SDTC.
of the House of Commons has come together and said that we must release documents pertaining to the very severe and extreme instance reported by the Auditor General in the breach of trust by SDTC, Sustainable Development Technology Canada. When a breach of trust takes place by one of our colleagues, or in particular this House, we must take serious the consideration of relief for that breach of trust. In this consideration, the Conservatives brought forward a motion that seeks to remedy that serious breach of privilege, to which I agree. I was the member that studied SDTC on behalf of New Democrats, and it is severe in both its condemnation and severe in issue. And I agree with my fellow party members and the House of Commons, including the Bloc Québécois, that we should unite towards the release of these documents that will give light and transparency to the reality. But I take full note of the members' concern about the delay in the House.
In comments, the one from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I enjoyed working with this member on public accounts. I too am a member of the Alumni of Public Accounts Committee. My question, though, is really designed to in order to educate the electorate as we get nearer and nearer to an election. So we have seen on the other side of the aisle that they are quite strongly for the carbon tax. In fact, they want to quadruple it, despite its limited impact on GHG gases and the negative impact on the economy. We are clearly against the tax. We want to axe the tax. The NDP have been less clear. Could the member be unequivocal and say whether the federal New Democratic Party supports a consumer carbon tax? Yes or no?
The honourable member for Edmonton, Griesbach.
My unequivocal answer is yes. Of course, we support a price on pollution, a consumer price on pollution. How the Liberals have done it, though, has been to divide the country. What we've seen just recently, for example, was a carbon exemption for eastern provinces. What does that mean for provinces in Alberta? What does that mean for provinces in the West? And what does that mean for other provinces? It means that they have citizens who are concerned about the unfair application of what was supposed to be a unifying process for the country. I agree that we need to have a different process to carbon pricing, though. I believe that's a serious solution to a serious problem. But I think that we have to make more certain that those who pay should be those who pollute. The Liberals got that wrong. And what I want to be clear on is the fact that even the best politicians, and let's assume the better nature of the Liberals here, and that they had wanted to do the right thing in this case. What they went and did was flip-flop, which is something they accuse everybody else of, on their own policy. So the Liberals have broken the carbon pricing, consumer pricing mechanism in Canada, something that Aaron O'Toole and my honourable colleague knows ran on a carbon price as well. And I'd ask the same question, but I'm confused whether he agrees with his own platform or if he agrees with the statements he's making in the House.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his always amazing speech. Everybody's talking about the worker, the oil and gas sector. I really appreciated what you shared, both from your personal experience working in the sector, the impacts it had on your life with your father. You spoke a lot about how both Conservatives and Liberals are letting the big polluters off the hook around not paying taxes. Everybody talks about the taxpayers. Yet we know that both the Liberals and Conservatives are letting their corporate buddies off the hook. How is this impacting the communities most impacted by the oil development?
I just remind the honourable member not to refrain from using yous or directly to the members. Right through the chair. The honourable member for Edmonton, Griesbach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my honourable colleague from Winnipeg Centre, who is not just a stalwart for residential school survivors, as she champions a very important bill to deal with denialism. She also champions the very real impacts faced by Indigenous communities in resource development areas, particularly the impacts of women when it comes to the direct connection of the impacts of resource development against women, and they're often very harmful. In relation to the impacts that are made and had by the lack of payment by these oil corporations to rural municipalities means we can't actually finance or address serious issues like the violence faced by women who are living around a resource development sector. Now imagine there's solutions in your little community. Even in Fort McMurray, there's the Women's Center of Fort McMurray that has proposals to be supported to help women in that community recover from what is a higher rate of domestic violence and a higher rate of sexual assault than almost any other region. And that member was on the committee for women that studied that very important.
Okay, thank God we don't have to listen to that much longer. Committee's
also
back
have
on.
time to be able to put our responses into a proper perspective and review the documents that we need to review. But unfortunately, we are not there. Having had a chance to look at the motion and also reflected on where we've been on this journey, what we have clearly demonstrated to date is that there is a value for money. The new house, the old residents, as we just heard from the officials, we may be very close to disposing it with a significant profit. The value that we are going to receive as a result of the reduced maintenance and the upkeep cost is in the form of $7 million. There's a 50% saving on an ongoing basis on the maintenance as well. We heard that we are avoiding about $2.5 million Canadian on repairing a residence that will not be able to ultimately meet the needs. So we've addressed and we've looked at we heard testimonies from a lot of witnesses around where other missions have situated themselves. We heard that only Afghanistan and Bangladesh are the one that they're positioning themselves out of the Manhattan jurisdiction. We've also heard that the other embassies, especially the Five Eyes and the ones that we rely on very closely, they've situated themselves in the area that we have. So from a political and from the optics, we are in the right position. From a business case, we are, value for money, we are there. We've also heard that all the processes were followed. We've looked at whether there was independence, whether there was influence, etc. And we've seen that there has been no influence. Sharing a point of view does not necessarily relates into an influence and the decision making, because the decision making was done by the department and by the people who are responsible for, rather than by the political staff. So when you look at interference, there was no interference. And we've covered all the gamut and all the aspects of this thing, despite the rhetoric and despite the image that it's being trying to portray, and despite the fact that we are trying to the fact that the opposition is trying to build this conspiracy theory and linking many different officials and linking the ministers and the prime ministers to this, which has proven to be false. So having said all of that, and the fact that we've also had Mr. Tom Clark coming here, and we have the officials coming in on Thursday morning to further discuss this. We don't see any need for Mr. Clark coming back into answering the same questions. Whether there's value for money, yes. Did you have an influence on this conversation? No. Was this a process that started some 10 years ago? Yes. Did you have an opportunity to go see the residence? Yes. Did you like the residence? Well, it really doesn't matter whether he liked it or not. When we look at the value for money, he moved in. The fact that there is a simulator somewhere in the basement of that apartment that all the members of that condo have access to, it's irrelevant to this study. What's relevant to this study, and we've repeated it, is that mission is responsible for over $6 trillion That's twice the GDP of Canada. And is responsible for over $200 billion. And we are now trying to call the head of a mission right after an election, which we are trying to make sure that we have all our ducks and all our key people lined up to be able to deal with the outcome of this election one way or another within 21 days, coming in and repeating the same things that we're going to hear and trying to further build this conspiracy theory that hasn't gone anywhere, to be honest with you guys, despite the fact that all the social media and everything is going on every hour before that, and the fact that the media comes in and trying to figure something else to talk about, which is completely irrelevant to the day-to-day life of Canadians. It's not something it's worth investing the time of this committee on. So I am opposing this motion. As I said, value for money is there. The importance of the mission is there. All our allies are where they are to be. All the process were followed. There was no influence. We are making we are trying to prolong this for what purpose? I really don't understand. Aside from bringing officials here and insulting them and telling them whether they're ministers or whether they're officials from the department, bringing them here and insulting them and calling them names, there's no value in this. None of those stuff that we say is going to go into a report ever we're going to make. What's going to go into the report is no influence, value for money. We followed the process. Everybody else is there. There was no influence. That's what's going to go in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Joly. I have Mrs. Cusi, then Mr. Brock.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The crux of the motion is that this new information, as determined by Politico from this information that Politico obtained, shows a direct contradiction between Mr. Clark's testimony to this committee and information that he communicated to the department. I will quote the article. It says that he notified Global Affairs that the official residence was not suitable. These are his words, not suitable for hosting or for living, and required immediate replacement. Also his words, required immediate replacement, document show. If I were to go home to my husband this weekend and say, honey, our home is not suitable for our family and it requires immediate replacement, I could only expect and understand that my husband would take it as a signal that we need a communication that we need a new home. There can be no other interpretation of these words that Mr. Clark communicated to Global Affairs Canada. In saying something is not suitable, in saying that it requires immediate replacement, this indicates Mr. Clark felt the necessity of a new location, and not only that, a better one, as indicated by the words "not suitable." He expressed concerns regarding the completion of the kitchen and refurbishment project and indicated the unit was not suitable to be the accommodations and does not have an ideal floor plan for representational activities. These things all indicate to him, first of all, inputting into the process, and asking for immediate action, and three, wanting some type of improvement. I believe that that's not what not suitable indicates. Now, if he would like to come here and argue that there were other more reasonable requirements, such as not being accessible, his aspirations relative to his mandate with large monthly gatherings, his desire to make Canada shine, he can come here and he can argue that. He can do that if he likes. But it is just evident from the article, from the information as obtained by Politico, that he communicated that he made input into this decision, which is contrary to what he shared with this committee.
Someone's lighting fireworks.
And any time that we have found a contradiction of testimony, and unfortunately with this government, we have found contradiction of testimony several times over in several situations, and I won't repeat them or belabor them once again, but this is not the first time. But it is the practice when we have found contradicting testimony with new information that we call a witness back to this committee to not only give them the opportunity to correct the record, because this is the fair and right thing to do, but also to justify their actions and their words to Canadians, whether something was misinterpreted, whether something was the new information was in a different context. We have always provided this space and this opportunity when there have been contradictions for witnesses to come back. And so I believe that given this new information from Politico today, given the clear contradiction between the testimony of Mr. Clark and what we have found out today, it behooves us as a committee, not only for the purpose of finding out why this contradiction exists, but also for the transparency of information to and for Canadians to invite Mr. Clark back. So I believe in supporting this motion, we are supporting transparency. We are recognizing that a contradiction exists and giving Mr. Clark the opportunity to come back and provide an exclamation, and provide transparency for Canadians as to why $9 million of their hard-earned money was spent when there is a record $2 million Canadians lining up at food banks, a 28% increase in my own city of Calgary. And I think that these are all justifiable reasons to support this motion and to call Mr. Clark back, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go to Mr. Brock, then Mr. Sousa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Brockinator.
One thing that I remember vividly from Mr. Clark's previous testimony at the mighty Ogo was just how adamant, to the point of literally raising his voice, turning red in color in face, how adamant he was that from start to finish, he had no influence whatsoever in the acquisition of the condominium on Billionaires Row. Now, I'm going to be speaking on behalf of Ms. Kuzi and Mr. Barrett. I believe Ms. Block was also in attendance, and myself. All four of us didn't believe one word that he was saying. This was well before we received any evidence from Politico, and all of us accused him of lying, of which he took great offense to. But here we are, some several months removed, and the political instincts of the Conservative members here in Ogo were validated, 100% validated, that notwithstanding that this condominium, the old condominium on Park Avenue, was quite suitable for over 20 council generals, 2 months within the mandate of Tom Clark, which just happens to coincide with records that this committee has received, happens to coincide with a cozy meeting that Tom Clark had with Justin Trudeau in Manhattan, where both of them were boasting and smiling and laughing in the back of a limousine, driving down one of the major thoroughfares of Manhattan. Within 2 months, we learn that Tom Clark now is a confirmed liar, that he has. I know, Mr. Souza, you find that rather remarkable for me now saying that, but it's interesting that when this story broke, which I believe was yesterday from Politico, there was such an eerie silence from the Liberal government. Nothing by way of any sort of clarifying statement from the PMO, no clarifying statement from Justin Trudeau, nothing from Tom Clark, but just eerie silence, as if it was a child getting caught with his hand in the cookie jar. That's what I equate this to. Because now we know within 2 months of Tom Clark's arrival in New York, he notifies Global Affairs, and we don't know how that notification took place, whether it was a phone call, whether it was an email, whether it was relayed via Justin Trudeau, who knows? We'll eventually find all of that out, but it certainly requires a deeper examination. That it was not suitable, his words, not suitable for hosting or for living, and required immediate replacement. Immediate. Because obviously a multi-decade-old condominium didn't suit the particular lavish lifestyle of Tom Clark. And to feed that hubris element of Tom Clark, whose ego is as large as all the oceans combined. Thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Souza. I'll take that as a compliment. Wanted to have,
Mr. Brock
wanted to live
floor,
like
please.
a king. Wanted to live like a king. And interestingly, how this story broke to Canadians is through the American media, because American media caught up with the acquisition, this purchase on Billionaires Row, and it was listed in the name of His Majesty the King. That sparked interest. That sparked curiosity. And it was only then that Global Affairs confirmed, no, it's not King Charles who is looking for an alternate residence or a secondary or tertiary residence. No, it's for the Consul General. So then the story started to break, and then we started to learn about all these impressive amenities. The Venetian marble, the full suite of the Gaggenau appliances. I did some research on Gaggenau. Gaggenau is the most expensive appliance manufacturer in the world. Kings, I'm sure, have Gaggenau appliances. Shaws and sheiks have Gaggenau appliances. The coffee maker alone, Mr. Chair, $5,000. And if memory serves me correct, the refrigerator alone, $19,000. 3 bedrooms, because it's important that Tom Clark and his wife have access to extra bedrooms. You never know when Justin wants to come down to Manhattan, and perhaps they can give him an extra room to
or they can rub a dub the tub.
But in addition to that, we have all the other amenities available to occupants of Billionaires Row. We got the golf simulator, we got the full-length swimming lanes, we've got the paddle courts. And yes, Tom Clark is living the life of luxury and is living the life of a king. We had news articles basically profiling that. So it really concerns me as a lawyer and a former participant in the justice system, in terms of when people come to committees, and although, and I always say this, depending on the nature of the issue and the witness, although there is no formal requirement to swear or to affirm to tell the truth, by its very nature, committee is set up that individuals are expected to tell the truth. And when they don't tell the truth, and it's confirmed that witnesses don't tell the truth. There is a process in Parliament that these individuals can receive their just consequences. Case in point, Christian Firth. All members of this committee remember Christian Firth, who ultimately had to face the wrath of appearing at the bar of the House of Commons to answer to his deliberate lies. So I take lying at committee very, very seriously. But it wasn't just Tom Clark, although the motion is centered around Tom Clark. This is one of the questions I posed to the minister today. We've heard from a litany of government officials who, in essence, confirmed 100% the lie that Tom Clark shared with this committee during his last appearance, that he had no involvement. If it was said once, it must have been said 100 times repeatedly over the course of several months since we started this study last late spring, early summer. Now, we're not asking that those officials be recalled, although I think there are grounds, political grounds to do that. This particular motion is very centered squarely on Tom Clark. And I know that Mr. Joly, in his statement at the outset, claims that the report, this is a useless exercise. The report is a fait accompli. There's going to be no evidence of any political connection whatsoever. Well, with all due respect to Mr. Joly, the fact that I'm now referencing everything that I have in relation to the political story and in relation to the previous testimony.
Excuse me, Mr. Joly.
And I'd like to say that the conclusion that MP Larry Block drew from my comments is not appropriate. Thank you.
That's not
Continue,
a point of
Mr.
order.
Brock.
That's not a point of order.
So what we're trying to do ultimately, and I would expect that every parliamentarian in this House of Commons would want to get to the truth. The fact that Mr. Joly has already telegraphed his opposition to this motion, and I wouldn't be surprised because they all follow suit, of course. Ms. Atwin, Mr. Kuzmerchuk, Mr. Souza will all do the same because they don't believe in accountability, Mr. Chair. They don't believe in transparency. And wherever there's been a hint of a scandal or a cover-up, you know the good Liberal members of the Ogo bench will carry the water of Justin Trudeau because they don't want to make this political. And ultimately, we may draw the connection. We may join the dots and show a direct political influence with the acquisition of this condominium.
Excuse me, Mr. Brock, Mr. Joly.
I gladly carry Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's water any day rather than carrying Mr. Poilievre's water that you guys are doing. The divisiveness.
Mr. Joly, that's not a point of order. Mr. Brock, continue.
Well, Mr. Kuzmerchuk calls it a leaky bucket, so probably is leaky because, you know, the amount of buckets that those members have had to carry for Justin Trudeau over 9 years must be rather enormous. Okay, yeah, we'll see what happens in the next election.
Standing Order 18.
Okay, colleagues, please. Mr. Joly, your colleague has a point of or has the floor, not yourself.
Mr. Chair, if I'm not mistaken, Standing Order 18 is to not insult other members as well or speak disparagingly. So I'm taking it a little personal
all
now.
Of you,
some of the things
all of you.
I don't think I've insulted you personally at all, Mr. Brock.
Mr. Brock, Ms. Atwood. Mr. Brock, continue, and we just ask if you people have valid point of orders, please bring
point
them
of order.
up.
Again, he continues to insult us on a personal level, and it's unacceptable, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Brock, continue.
Yeah. So to make a fine point on my last point that I wish to make, Mr. Chair, is that every member, regardless of political stripe, should be standing for the truth, should be standing for accountability and transparency. And to my colleague, Ms. Kuzi's point, which was an excellent point, the tradition at this particular committee and all the other committees I have been privileged to speaking to and participate in, wherever there is a suspicion, let alone some conclusive evidence of misleading committee or contradictory evidence, it is always incumbent upon a committee to seek out clarification. Maybe Mr. Clark has an honest, reasonable explanation for this story, but let's give him that chance. Let's give him that chance at committee where his explanation can be tested in cross-examination. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. So we'll go to Mr. Sousa and then Mr. Backrack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to those that may be watching, it's, it is a sad situation when I look at the degree of mischaracterization, character assassination, certainly the insults that are being thrown around. Interestingly enough, some of those that are actually providing the insults are too skin thin to receive correction on their own part. Talk about red face and ego. It seems that there are members that are only considering their performance on a YouTube or a social media hit. And talk about being red face. I don't recall how you say that in French, but obviously some members opposite do not understand the ability for Canadians to utilize both languages officially in our country. And the leader of the opposition, who himself, we talk about transparency and accountability.
Yeah, point of order, relevance.
Sorry, Mr. Sousa.
I've been rather patient with Mr. Sousa and listened to about a minute and a half of non-relevant material. Can you ask the member to be relevant in his comments, please? Thank you.
Thank you.
And there you go,
he
folks.
Does have a point. He does have a point.
He absolutely has a point, Mr. Speaker, and I acknowledge his point, and I acknowledge
Mr.
again
Chair,
to those
not Mr.
watching
Speaker.
how skin thin he is. But again, back to the leader of the opposition who lives in a mansion of sorts, and we talk about transparency and accountability and the ability to come down to the truth. The truth, Mr. Chair, that the member opposite doing his Perry Mason reboot, the truth must be known. And yet he will not take a security clearance. His own leader of his own party will not get clear security clearance to get to the truth, or at least be made aware of exactly what is being taken place. So let's secure now the motion at hand. So here we have an allegations being made by the Conservatives that this decision was done in quick order. And it wasn't, Mr. Speaker. We already know from the previous testimonies by the officials that this has been ongoing for over 10 years. The Conservative members, their Conservative appointees, the ones that were there prior to the Liberal appointments, they themselves said that the residence was not up to snuff, that they didn't have the specifications required. They already acknowledged that the residence was in need of repair and, for that matter, of a new residence. So this is not new. There's no revelation here. And the notion that somehow a temporary appointment to the Consul General of New York is going to somehow make the decision, well, we often hear people's opinions. My goodness, we're hearing a lot of opinions right now from the opposite side, and they're free to express them. But, Mr. Chair, that doesn't make them the decision maker. The Consul General is not the decision maker of its transaction. And if anybody wants to make opinions, and certainly the Conservatives have made many opinions about that residence prior to Tom Clark, like this is nothing new. So the fact of the matter is the decision to make that transaction and a transaction which is $7 million less. Like they're moving the residence to a property at $7 million less than what it is now. And we still hold the asset value. We still have the asset appreciation of the former resident in hand still. And they're making it for the net benefit of Canadians. We already know that it's going to save ultimately taxpayers up to $7 million. We already know by testimony and by the rigorous procedures in place over many years from the various agencies that it was independent, it was rigorous, and it was followed through the rules. The essence of who's residing there and the people involved who utilize those residents, including many Conservatives, I may add, didn't come to be part of that decision. They did not follow through in that transaction. That was very much done by the experts and the officials within government. That's already acknowledged and understood. And lastly, the relationship with the United States is critical. And one of the most important residences in the United States by Canada is the one in Manhattan. It is, in fact, critical to its well-being. The ones in LA are important. The ones in Washington are important. The ability for Canada to be well represented in the international stage is critical. And when you look at who else is residing around the system, ours does not anywhere come close to the same degree of value as some other residences. But what is really important is the ability for Canadians to transact, to have meetings, to enable us to cooperate with U.S. and other international states within that residence for the benefit of all Canadians. It leads to economic growth, it leads to job creation, it leads to economic well-being for Canada, and it has proven to be so. And other levels of government use it too, other conservative levels of government. So the allegation, the notion that this Consul General somehow had a role in making a decision, regardless if the decision isn't his, right? That's understood. And the timing wasn't short. So all that to say, Mr. Chair, we do not need to fill time. Let's let you guys talk and fill your egos all you wish.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Bachrach, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to be back at OGO dealing with a familiar topic. This morning, I'm in British Columbia, and I woke up very early for some commitments on Eastern time and rolled over. And at the risk of giving them free promotion, I read Politico's email newsletter, and this story jumped out at me because I remember very distinctly the testimony, the vehement testimony of Mr. Clark before this committee, and reading the revelations in that newsletter about the role that Mr. Clark actually played, which has now become public through freedom of information. I was struck by the stark contrast between what he told this committee and the role that he actually played. Now, maybe I have a little bit different perspective on this than some other members around the table. I listened to all the testimony from officials about the old residents and the new residents, and I don't actually know, based on all that testimony, I don't know if the old residence isn't suitable. The one thing that stood out to me was the concern around accessibility and the fact that a person using a wheelchair would have a very difficult time accessing the old residence. And I think that's a concern that should be taken very seriously. But obviously there were enough people that had voiced concerns about the suitability of the residence that, I'm not going to deny that those concerns weren't valid. I also don't know whether the new residence was a good deal or not, or whether it's more suitable and rectifies the shortcomings of the old residence. I don't actually think that's germane to the debate that we're having today, despite that being the focus of my Liberal colleagues' interventions. I'll also speak briefly to the opulence of either residence, and I think if you visited the residence of any of our peer nations, they would be equally opulent. I think it's a feature of these sorts of properties that are used to entertain and used in a diplomatic way, and that just is what it is. I don't think anyone is suggesting that the Consul General's residence should be in the suburbs in a modest 3-bedroom home. I don't think that's what's being asserted. What really irks me is the fact that the Consul General was so clear in response to repeated questioning at committee. And I didn't have a lot of time in preparing for this, but I pulled up some of the evidence from that meeting and read his words, which are quite clear here. And I'll just read a couple of passages to, I suppose, restate just how clear it was. He stated, this is Mr. Clark, "As you have already heard in testimony from global affairs officials, I had no role whatsoever whatsoever in either deciding to sell the former residence or buying the new one. That was completely undertaken in the Property Bureau in Ottawa, by the Property Bureau in Ottawa. I was not involved in the selection of the new property, its amenities, or its location. As you have heard, this project will return millions, blah, blah, blah. Moving on, he says, I was not involved in any way, shape, or form in the decision to buy this new residence or sell the old residence. And then Mr. Johari asked, did you at any time talk to anyone regarding a desire for relocation? Mr. Clark says, never. One word answer, never. You can't get more unequivocal than that. And then looking, turning back to the reporting that came out this morning, it's very clear that he was extremely involved in expressing concerns about the suitability of the old residence. The current Consulate General, New York, head of mission, expressed concerns regarding the completion of the kitchen and the refurbishment project and indicated the unit was not suitable to be the accommodations, and it does not have an ideal floor plan for representational activities. That very well may be true. That may be a very valid thing, and it actually may be a valid thing for the Consul General to express, because after all, he is tasked with doing a job, and what he's essentially saying is that the tools that I've been given to do this job are, in my view, inadequate. Is that an appropriate role for the Consul General? I'm not sure, but that's what he said. What's the real problem here is that then he came to committee and said that he had absolutely no role and that he had never expressed concerns about the old residents. And, I think that's a pretty stark and troubling revelation that someone of his stature, someone with his experience, both as a journalist and as a diplomat, would come before the committee and misrepresent and seemingly mislead the committee with regard to his role. I think that's something that all Canadians should be concerned about, and that's why I'll be supporting the Conservatives' motion to bring Mr. Clark back to committee and to answer for the stark contrast between his remarks and the revelations contained in the documents that are now public. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you, and I hope we can get to a vote on this before too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. We'll go to Mrs. Block, and then we have Mrs. Cusi, Mr. Brock, and then Mrs. Vignola.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I do want to follow up on Mr. Bachrach's comments and his observations. I think they are spot on, and that what is at issue here is the testimony of Mr. Clark and what he described as his vehement testimony. And he's read the comments that were made by Mr. Clark when he attended this committee. And then there's the testimony of Emily Nicholson. And we can all remember her vehement testimony that the first email and the second email were not, she was not backing off of her first email, but that she was actually trying to insist that Mr. Clark had no part to play whatsoever, that he wasn't instrumental. And now we know, after seeing the information that was released through an ATIP, that in fact, Tom Clark had notified Global Affairs that the previous official residence was not suitable and had expressed concerns over completing renovations. We know that this information that was received through an ATIP contradicts what he told us on September 12th. And again, I would have to echo my colleague's comments about vehement testimony. In fact, I think if you will recall, my colleague, Mr. Brock, during his questioning, made a point of asking if Mr. Clark had made any comments at all when he toured the new residence. And we were led to believe or left with the impression that neither he nor the real estate said anything at all during that tour, which further speaks to the fact that we were misled by Mr. Clark and departmental officials in the testimony that they provided to this committee. And I would just want to encourage all members that this is what the issue is. Committee has been misled by witnesses on the facts around the decision to purchase this apartment and what Mr. Clark's involvement was. And so I just want to encourage all members to stay focused on what this motion is actually calling for. I know you'd like to take us all back into the weeds of the history around the purchasing of this apartment, but what we are here discussing today is the fact that Mr. Clark misled this committee. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. I have Mr. Brock.
Get him again,
Chair,
Brock.
I intend on keeping my second intervention rather focused and brief. I thank Mr. Bachrach and my colleague Ms. Block for their comments. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that was said. But in response to one of the Liberal members, I'm not sure exactly where this came from. It could have been Mr. Jawari or Mr. Souza. I want to remind members from several months ago when we had the selling and I believe the listing real estate agents from Manhattan who testified via Zoom. And I put to them, because I was able to pull, just through a very simple Google search, pull the actual listing of 550 Park Avenue, Unit 12E. And I want to read this into the record, and I'll make some brief commentary. Under the words description, high floor, golden age masterpiece. Introducing Unit 12E at 550 Park Avenue, a high-floor residence in one of Lenox Hill's premier pre-war co-ops. A perfect example of the grand golden age apartments of the 1920s. This J.E.R. Carpenter masterpiece is full of volume, scale, and ideal circulation. A great room with 11-foot ceilings and large windows that frame exposures to the north and east invite you into the heart of the home, while the adjacent dining room could comfortably host down a dinner of 18. Designed for hospitality, a commercial kitchen and butler's pantry are further complemented by direct access to a separate staff office and storage room, as well as the in-unit laundry, a den library just off the entrance gallery, as well as a powder room complete the northern wing. Along the southern corridor, 4 bedrooms, all with ensuite bathrooms and walk-in closets, and 2 with corner exposures offer privacy, comfort. With its high ceilings, large windows, herringbone walnut floors, and ample storage throughout, this residence offers the perfect framework for generational living and is truly a space to behold. 3,800 square feet, 12 rooms, 5 beds, 4.5 baths. Now, according to Tom Clark, within 2 months of his post, this example I've just provided committee members wasn't suitable for hosting, let alone living. When I asked the listing agent whether or not, in his opinion, this description constituted a fixer-upper, because the government will have you believe this unit required over $2 million in renovations. No one has given us an itemized list of what needed to be renovated. No one has given us a cost projective. No one has given us any information other than a GAC official who confirmed that it wasn't compliant in terms of wheelchair access to a bathroom. The entranceway needed to be widened. That is the only evidence that this committee has heard of any so-called $2 million worth of renovations. So I wish to put that on the record because clearly there are more questions than there are answers. And the only way we get to the bottom of Tom Clark's involvement, his true involvement, is to recall him with full cross-examination. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have Mrs. Vignola, then Mr. Kuzmirchuk.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we saw Mr. Clark for a few hours before this committee, before the fact that he omitted certain information, he lied, whatever we want to say, I think that's quite concerning. As far as the residents of 555 12E Park Avenue, I would like to remind you that not only was it an issue of widening the door to the bathroom to allow access to wheelchairs, but also it was the electrical and heating system that was problematic, especially when you consider the building was constructed in 1917. So simply widening the door shouldn't cost $2.6 billion, and heating, well, there is some central heating available. This house normally has some meters, so that's what I would think. So 2.6 million, that's a lot of money. Was this council the only one who raised issues with the building? I don't think so. I think the idea of refurbishing was raised since 2014. I think the apartment was already 97 years old. I think currently it's 107, if I'm not mistaken in my math. So 2 years just to hear, oh, I forgot that aspect, or I said, I don't know, there are problems with the heating, electricity. It's intermittent. So is 2 years necessary? I would propose to my colleagues to reduce it to 1 hour, 2 turns. I think that would be quite sufficient to know if he lied to us or not, to have some additional information on renovations that he would have liked to see in the building. It's good to see 12, 11 feet ceilings. It seems that the building was crumbling. Right now it's magnificent, so we can look at issues where the description seems quite exaggerated. Well, I can't have access to 12 feet ceilings and the marble floors. I have a building from 1908 which needs serious renovation. So all those figures are impressive, but beyond these impressive descriptions, that is the bread and butter of the real estate agents. Do we have a building that could be problematic? That's what we could raise. Do we need 2 hours to look into that? Maybe 4, 5, or 6 rounds of questioning to do that. I have some doubts on that. So I would propose an amendment to the motion asking that there are 2 rounds of questioning, that Mr. Clark should be present for 2 rounds of questioning instead of 2 hours.
Clarify an amendment, just change it to 1, basically 1 hour, 2 rounds, which is 3 interventions. Okay. So the amendment is just change it basically to 1 hour, similar to what we had this morning with the minister. So we'll start a speaking order on the amendment.
In favor.
Speaking order. Anyone wish to speak on it, or can we go right to a vote on the amendment?
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm seeing nods around. Are we fine with the amendment?
Merci.
Cool. They got the UC.
So we'll consider that passed and amended. We're now back to the amended motion, which is the same, basically changing it though to 1 hour.
Yeah.
I had Mr. Kusmirchuk and Mr. Kusa, or Mrs. Kusi, then Mr. Sousa.
Here. Obviously, today is a big election with our American friends and neighbors, and so I think it's appropriate to quote former President Harry Truman, who addressed Canadian Parliament in Ottawa on June 11th, 1947, and he said,
This guy's going all the way back to 1947.
Canadian-American relations for many years did not develop spontaneously. The example of accord provided by our two countries did not come about merely through the happy circumstance of geography. It is compounded on 1 part proximity and 9 parts goodwill and common sense. The common sense has gone out of the Conservative Party when I look at the discussions that we've had here around the table. This transaction is saving Canadian taxpayers $7.4 million. $7.4 million are being saved. Every year, the cost of the new residence saves Canadian taxpayers $115,000 per month. And because we knew that the old residence required major renovations, moving to the new residence saves taxpayers about $2.6 million in renovations. And so again, the new residence is smaller and it is less expensive, and it saves taxpayers $7.4 million. In addition to that, it is the residence of the Consul General on average hosts about 50 important meetings within every 2 years. This new residence, not only is it cheaper, not only is it saving taxpayers $7.4 million, but it's more effective for hosting meetings, roundtables, discussions, events. And it is, furthermore, it is more accessible. It is more accessible to more people. In addition to saving taxpayers $7.4 million, the process, we've heard from the very beginning, the process was independent and the process was rigorous. 21 properties had been appraised, and the property, the residence that was selected, was pretty much the least costly of all 21 properties that had been examined. About 100-page analysis was conducted on the property by officials independent of any political elected officials. And the third point, and this is the important point, and it goes back to President Truman's quote, and it goes back to the testimony we heard from Minister Joly today, strengthens. This is an investment that strengthens the most important bilateral relationship that Canada has, and that is the relationship with our friends and neighbors in the United States. That consulate office nurtures and grows $200 billion worth of trade between our two countries, including 5 U.S. states. And the impact that it has, I mean, that is a huge number. But it's important to break it down because that trade, that relationship impacts all of our communities. All the communities that we represent around this table are impacted. And I look at my community in Windsor, Essex, and I look at the fact that we landed a battery plant, an EV battery plant that has already created 2,000 jobs for local Canadian workers building the plant, and that will create 2,500 full-time, unionized, local jobs for local Canadian workers. Hundreds already have been hired and are being trained as we speak to build batteries. The first battery came off the battery line just 2 weeks ago. And the majority of those batteries, the destination will be in factories in the United States. We have in Windsor, Essex, the largest tool and die sector cluster in all of North America. And again, 90% of what we manufacture, where does it go? It goes to the United States. It goes to the United States. It's your number one client or number one destination. Those are jobs that we're talking about here. Those are jobs. They are real people that rely upon us strengthening relationship with our American partners. And what we're hearing from the Conservatives is they want to do that relationship on the cheap. They want to underinvest in our relationship with the United States, which is exactly what they've done over and over when they gutted the Defense Department. I mean, 5 years of consecutive cuts.
Excuse me, Mr. Kusmirchuk. Mrs. Block?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to call relevance on Mr. Kushmirchuk's intervention. I believe we're to be discussing the amended motion at hand. I would just call relevance.
Thanks. If you can get to the motion at hand.
This is a pattern. What we've heard around this table is a pattern of the Conservatives under-investing in the most important relationship that Canada has, and that's the relationship with the United States.
Relevance.
Completely irrelevant to the motion at hand.
Totally relevant. We could come back to the motion.
It's totally relevant.
It's not relevant.
The discussion that we've had around this table for weeks now on this issue, and I've heard time and time again, is the Conservatives wanting to underinvest.
Point of order.
Mrs. Block?
Again, relevance. What does that have to do with the amended motion at hand?
We always do allow wide latitude, but please, Mr. Kusmirchuk, get to the motion.
We are talking about the purchase of a consulate residence in New York that is saving taxpayers $7.4 million, a process that was independent and rigorous, and a consulate and a residence that is, we've heard from testimony after testimony, is absolutely essential to the strengthening of the Canada-US relationship. That is the relevance. And that relationship may not be relevant to you. It is certainly relevant to the residents in border communities like mine.
Mr. Brock.
No one from the Conservative side, or in fact anyone in this committee, is challenging the importance of a relationship between Canada and the United States. It goes without saying. It's not relevant what my friend is saying now because he's not speaking at all about the necessity of recalling Tom Clark, okay, in light of contradictory evidence. That's what we need to hear from.
Mr. Kusmirchuk, I have to insist you actually get to discussing the motion. Otherwise, there are other people on the list, including Mr. Sousa, who I'm sure can.
And again, the importance is about an investment in consulate operations. That's the relevance. We're talking about investment in consulate operations that are vital to the U.S.-Canada relationship that may not be relevant to my Conservative colleagues, sure as hell is to residents in my community in Windsor, Essex, and border communities in Canada that rely on a strong U.S.-Canada relationship. And as I mentioned, 90% of what tool and die shops in my community manufacture go to the United States.
Point of order, Chair. How long do we need to listen to a member who is not getting to the point with an amended motion on the table? How many times do members have to call relevance before he gets to the point?
There are rules around this. I think it is 3, but Mr. Kuzmierczak, I have to insist that you get to the motion. It's a very straightforward one. There are other people from your party, I'm sure, who can take up the baton if you're not able to address the motion. But if you could please get to the specific motion.
That's not a rule.
So I've mentioned that my point is that we've had copious meetings on this issue. So the relevance of this is that the Conservatives are calling on additional extended meetings on this issue. And the point that I'm trying to make is that the facts are abundantly clear that this transaction is saving Canadians $7.4 million, that the process is independent and rigorous, and that it is strengthening investment in the consulate, is strengthening U.S.-Canada relationships. And what we heard, the reason I'm talking about my Conservative colleagues wanting to do foreign policy on the cheap, just like they wanted to do defense spending on the cheap, 5 years of defense cuts, 5 years,
buddy.
is we heard around this table from my Conservative colleagues that we should be locating our consulate in New Jersey.
Mrs. Block?
The motion is about recalling a witness that misled this committee. I would ask that this member either get back to that motion or, as you've suggested, hand it over to someone else. I'm calling relevance.
Yeah, thanks. I think we've reached the point where you haven't got to that, so we will move to the next speaker, which is Mrs. Kusi.
Mr. Chair, that is patently unfair. There have been.
If I can refer the issue to the clerk who will rule on it. I understand we do give wide latitude, but we do reach a point where it's a very specific motion. Again, we do give wide latitude, but it's such a very specific motion that you haven't addressed. And
Mr. Chair, on that point of order.
Yes, Mr. Becker.
Could I just speak to the point of order and offer my brief thoughts?
Yes.
My sense is that the argument that my colleague, Mr. Kuzmierczak, is making is that the ends justify the means. So I would suggest that it's relevant if that it's indeed the argument that he's making. The means in this case include misleading the committee, and that's the issue that I have with how things have transpired. But if he's restating the importance of diplomatic relations and the importance of a new residence, he's basically saying that no matter how we got here, it doesn't really matter because this is so important. So I would support allowing him to continue to speak if that is indeed the argument he's making.
Thanks. I think we've reached a point where 5 times I've asked. I can ask the clerk to weigh in as well on the rules and such. If you will get back, we'll allow you back on the speaking slot, but 5 times I've asked specifically. But okay. Mrs. Kusi and then Mr. Sousa.
I believe my Conservative colleagues covered my points. I'll cede my time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Mr. Sousa. Sorry, and then Mr. Backrack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a lot of deliberation is being made over motivations of this transaction, somehow the engagement of an individual who does not make the decision. And that individual has stated clearly that he was not involved in the transaction nor in the decision-making of this process. Members opposite are making allegations that somehow within a 2-month period that individual became Consul General, he was able to make a transaction which he said he didn't involve himself part of. And it's nothing that is new, given the testimony that this has been ongoing for decades now, that the property needed to be revamped or relocated. And consequently, a savings of $7.4 million is being had in moving the residents or moving to a new residence at a lesser cost and providing more efficiencies. So again, people can have opinions, but that doesn't make them the decision maker, and that's evident here. The Consul General also confirmed that the decision is made by the experts, that they rely on the relative agencies and individuals involved in their respective agencies to fulfill their mandate to find and locate the proper properties and go through the transactions as necessary. The savings on the property is paramount, it's critical to the tune of $7.4 million and $2.6 million in renovations that do not have to be made as a result. The valuation of the property continues because they still have the asset. Being the opposition are somehow conflating the issue that they need cash in hand, but the asset value exists, and the potential sale is going to net benefit Canadians in a big way. But the independence of this transaction has also been made clear, that many properties were reviewed. Over 21, I believe, properties were considered.
I have to interrupt you, and I do apologize, but that is it for our resources. We are adjourning. Sorry, Charles.
Yep, sounds about right. They only have, 2 hours usually allocated, and they're over time by 16 minutes. So that's what Mr. Kazmierchuk was doing there. That's what Sousa was doing there. They just wanted to keep getting back on the speaking order, so that way they couldn't actually debate the motion. Because if the motion goes to a vote, as I've already said in chat, it's going to pass. It's going to be 5-5. There's going to be 5 Liberals that'll vote nay. There's going to be 3 Conservatives that'll vote yes. The Bloc already said they'll vote yes. NDP said they'll vote yes. It'll be tied 5-5. And Colley, the chair, would then be intervening on a tied motion, and he gets to make the ultimate ruling. He's Conservative. He's going to vote for it. So they're going to have to take this up on the next committee, and that's going to take up the beginning of the next committee's time. So Liberals were just filibustering there. They were just trying to speak and be off topic as long as they could, so that way they didn't have to deal with debating the motion and getting to a vote. So yeah, as you guys know, question period is there. There's a link up in the top. Really appreciate it if you guys can tune into that. I feel like our committees are starting to get more popular than our question periods. So I know you guys do watch other streams and other YouTubers and stuff, but if you could tune into the question period, that'd be awesome. Links up at the top. I'll put it in chat again. So we'll be live in 45 minutes there. And Pierre and Trudeau will both be in the House. Trudeau's supposed to be in the House tomorrow as well. So those are the only 2 days we're probably going to see Trudeau this week get roasted by Pierre. So tune into that. I will also be live again tomorrow for question period, and I'll be live probably for another committee. I just need to double check to see what's happening tomorrow after we finish question period. So yeah, I will see you guys in at... See you guys in at that link for question period, guys. Everybody go take a little bit of a break, grab some food, and do your stuff. And thanks for tuning in. Appreciate everybody always watching, and good chats, everybody. Yeah, Data Center's right. Appreciate Lori B and Jennifer for the super chats. Yeah, guys, tune into question period. I'm going to go make some food, so I will see you guys in a bit.